Sorry to interrupt. Thank you so much for being here. I think this might be our largest turnout in a while. So, Hack Refactor is super stoked to welcome back Nikita, who actually came up with the idea for the bite sessions. So that's why
way back when.
Her face remains with us, even though she has since graduated, moved on, got a job here in town, which is amazing, at UpTech.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to have questions afterwards. I'm sure you'll have lots of questions after Tales of Middle Software. I'm excited to learn about this. I will say, we still have, our ballots are still open, right?
Yeah.
So it might feel weird to nominate yourself. Some of us get stuck in this position because nobody steps up. That's me.
Hello.
So we really like it when people are like, hey, I would actually really like to be a part of like making Hacker go. And it might feel kind of like weird and embarrassing to say like, oh, like sign me up to be president or vice president or whatever. But if like that interests you, or I don't know, maybe it's something you don't know how to do, but you want to learn how to do, like we'll help support you. Jill will help support you. I'll be gone, you know. But basically we're here to make sure that your dreams come true, right? But you have to show up to make your dreams come true. So sign up, be a part of Hacker, or just keep coming to the bite sessions, because having you here makes them go around and the question's way more interesting.
Where do they nominate themselves, Kimberly? Like, how would they do that?
Discord, you share the link, right?
Yeah, the events channel. Just go to Discord, the events channel.
Yeah.
And nominate yourself. You can nominate yourself for multiple positions too.
All of them.
Oh, every single one.
I'm
So
ready for
anyways.
everything but president.
There you go.
We're super stoked to welcome Nikita. So big
Yes. Thank you, Miss Kim. I'm ready to record. Are you recording already?
We're on,
Oh, perfect.
We're live.
Well, hello everyone. Like Kim said, I'm Nikita Rubocki. I'm a 2022 computer science alum from this very room, pretty much. It's definitely improved a bit since I was last here, so I'm glad it's like becoming a nice space for everyone. Like Kim mentioned, I'm a software developer for a company that's in town, but I work remote mostly, called UpTech Studio. We partner with startups basically to bring ideas to life, supplement development teams, bring low-code software, out to see if it's marketable, and all sorts of various stuff. It's a small company of like 20-ish, 15-ish full-time people, and then we contract out on a need basis, as projects come and go. So with that being said, I'm here to talk about my own journey in the consulting, more specifically of software development, particularly working with startups and people at like all various stages of like early stage companies, from like, one-on-one people who just like have an idea and quit their job, to maybe companies that are like, more middle-sized but maybe don't have tech, that type of thing. So if you're looking for like a Google developer, that's not me. But I will talk about, working with the smaller stuff. Speaking of, this presentation itself is kind of a more high-level overview of that journey, of my own findings the last 2 years. It's not super technical. If you want to get technical at the end of it, feel free to ask me whatever questions you want. I'll try and answer if I can. But don't be afraid. There's not going to be any code in here except for like one print statement. So it'll be okay. And then like Kim said, there should be time for questions at the end. So feel free to save it till then, or if like something is just so pressing, you're like, I need to know right now, just raise your hand and I can pause, no worries. That being said, let's embark on some slides. So here is just a little overview of what we're gonna run through on our land of development. I hope you brought your sense of adventure, because we're going on a harrowing journey. First, starting with the ocean of expectations, where we're going to learn how to start up some new ideas and find our North Star. Then we're going to hike through the simple software plains, find some ways to tackle those new ideas and pieces of software. Swimming circles in Iteration Lake is going to teach us the value of small steps. And meandering through Mistake Meadow will teach us a little bit of humility. And then finally, taking all of these new skills, we're going to scale Mount Deployment, where unknown dangers and treasures alike will await us. So let's get moving. One of the biggest and most consistent things you will run into, and I have run into in my 2-ish years of doing like real life software development, and arguably just life in general, is the ocean of expectations. Software development itself is an ever-changing discipline. I mean, there's new languages and stacks and architectures and programs and so on and so forth, like every single day it feels like. Plus, especially in the consulting space and, I'm sure in other projects as well, just the sheer pressure of having to meet expectations for both your client and your company can get crazy overwhelming. So how do you navigate all of that stuff? Particularly in my job, there is just like a seemingly never-ending task list. I mean, there's just like always more to do, always more stuff to take on. However, the client expectation is that, these things were done yesterday and they're done on time and they're mostly bug-free and, the users are happy, right? So how do you reconcile these two opposing forces in your day-to-day life? This whole thing is compounded by the fact, like we mentioned, that software itself is a very unstable landscape, especially in my discipline where we're working with startups. There's always like new tools, new software, new stacks. Like a lot of our clients don't have infinite pockets to pay for like a big AWS cloud instance, right? So what can we use and find that will still work, that might still scale until they have funding, and all sorts of these like additional pressures on top of just, can you make the software run? So with all of these options and different consequences for following these different paths, what is your lowly software developer to do? How do you decide the right tech stack, the right processes, the right features? Now, this is an age-old question that I'm sure your professors and you might have just run up against in your life to date. It's not even particularly inherent to software, although I believe that software feels it particularly keenly just because it is such a rapidly changing landscape. So, this leads us to our first major discovery on our journey today, which is the developer dogma that the software will always change. It's in all caps because it's extra true. The requirements are going to change, the architecture will change, the infrastructure will change, the assumptions will change, the client will change their mind, you might change your mind, so on and so forth. I can list like 100 more things. So my advice to you at this point is to get very, very comfortable with this idea and this concept. There's a difference I have found between experience and assumptions. Are you going down a certain path because you've seen it before, you've run into it before, you know from experience that this is probably the likely way to go? Or are you just making some assumptions because digging deeper and kind of unraveling that tangly web is a lot more intimidating? And this happens all the time with young developers, old developers alike. I mean, I've worked with some people who have been in this industry for like 2 decades or more, and sometimes it's just like, wait, why are we doing this way? And they're like, it's just the way we do it. And so even like untangling some of that stuff is huge because the software will always change. Now I know this sounds a little demoralizing. Who in their right mind would subscribe themselves to this kind of madness? I know. There is hope though. But if you never know exactly what you are creating, and if what you are creating is always changing anyways, how do you make good software that meets user expectations and or client expectations? So now that we've landed on shore with kind of some more specific questions in mind, let's continue our journey into the simple software planes. Another big lesson I have learned in my few years in the real workforce is the danger of over-optimizing too soon and or too early and or too fast. Something I quote often in my day-to-day job that I learned here originally, but is a quote from Sandy Metz, is duplication is better than the wrong abstraction, or the longer form version that I say almost on a daily basis, which is I would rather have duplicate code in the right design versus over-optimized code in the wrong abstraction. It is incredibly easy to introduce complexity into software, as I'm sure you guys have all run into even in just your programming and your assignments, right? And I mean, just more generally, how often have you found yourself like with the good intention of like, I'm just gonna clean out my closet, and then like hours later there's just stuff strewn about all over your room and it's like dirtier than you started with, right? Or how often have you done just like a weekend DIY project and then suddenly like multiple trips to Lowe's later over like several months, it's still not complete. And might not even be complete yet, right? Like maybe you still have some of those floating around in your life. My point is to say is that software falls to those exact same very human tendencies. However, complexity in software is going to breed code rot and ultimately lead to feature stagnation. And feature stagnation is the ultimate death of a ton of startups, right? If you can no longer add new features, if you can't iterate quickly anymore, then someone else is going to do it better, they're going to do it faster, you're going to run out of money before you can finish your features. There's like a plethora of different things that can happen and kill a startup. So especially in my discipline, it's important that we keep software moving, but keep it in a good design so that we're not like killing our clients. So with that being said, how do we make it simpler? How can we combat these issues? So let's explore this concept a little further. When you're adding a new feature to a code base, after all the meetings and all of the discussions, I often find that most of it boils down to one of two options. You can either duplicate the code or you can add a little bit of a special case to the existing logic. Now maybe you just get super lucky, maybe you're a perfect developer, you can see the future, you know where it's all going, and you can just toss it in and it all works great. However, I find that the real case of what normally happens is the feature might go with the existing code, but might just be a little tiny bit off. It doesn't quite fit. But you can easily see how just like, toss in one little if statement will make it work, or adding one little field to an object would make it work, or just one more variable, optional, to a method could make it work, right? And that might work in the short term. However, doing that path over and over and over again is going to lead to that piece of code taking on too much responsibility, too many features, and it's going to be impossible to untangle later. We often call those special snowflake cases in my job. Sometimes you really do have a special snowflake. That's not like unheard of. Nothing is set in stone. Nothing is unbelievable in software. However, like snowflakes, it's rare, and some people even say impossible, to get the same snowflake twice, right? So if you're seeing like full blizzards in the same part of your system, chances are you're probably trying to add stuff to the wrong abstraction, and it's time to back it up and rethink that. However, the other option I have up there is duplication, and we hear all the time, right? Duplication is bad. Dry principle, don't repeat yourself. If Nikita, I hear you, but if I'm just duplicating stuff and then you're telling me it's going to change, then I'm just like making those changes all over the place, and that's just exponentially growing, right? And that is true. Duplication in too much is also not a good idea and can lead to code rot in the other way, where you just have all this bloat of all this logic doing the same stuff. So I'm going to bargain with you and say we should kind of cut it down the middle, right? Duplication within reason can be a good way to go to find those underlying abstractions. We're going to talk about this a lot, but like we said, software will always change. Therefore, when you get a new feature, you can't see fully in, you know where you are now, you can't really tell where it's going, but you might be like, all right, here's my bit of logic. I'm just going to duplicate it real quick. I know this isn't the way it's going to stay forever because I know it's going to change. But doing that a couple times, almost by a miracle, you will start to see the similarities jump out at you. And that is when your code is calling for you to be like, hey, we found this design. Here's my abstraction. And then at that point, you can take the similarities out, put it into your class, your interface, your new method, whatever it may be, and then clean up the duplication, and there you go. Clean code with the right design. Now, that leads us to another piece we find, some remedies to code rot. When adding code into the system, I like to remember these two things. First, look to see if the change is easy. Is it as simple as just tossing it in? Maybe adding in field? Not to say any of these are bad. There's no wrong answer here. But if the change is easy and you can see how it fits in, do it. You're done. Now, what about that other situation? What if you're trying to force it a little bit, kind of like a square into a round peg situation, right? You just kind of feel that it's not quite working. Well, it's probably the case to go with the other pill or the other bottle of making the change easy first. Find those similarities, pull out that abstraction. And when you pull all of that out and you clean it all up before adding that new feature, you will suddenly see that, whoa, now it looks like it's easy to add that new feature in. So then you can go back and make the easy change. The point is, both of these in tandem is a great way to counterbalance the code rot and complexity coming into the system too soon. There's not one right answer, but rather working in tandem that is going to lead you to a simpler code base. So if one doesn't work, try the other, rinse, repeat as necessary. Speaking of repetition, we have now arrived at iteration lake. So up to this point, we have learned software is always changing, and we have discovered just one technique for managing complexity, one of my favorite ones, although there's many more. But there is unfortunately more to software than just software, right? We gotta build, we gotta test stuff, we gotta deploy stuff. How do we know if users are happy? All of that exciting things. How do you get a working piece of software out into the world if, again, it's constantly changing and therefore never done? How do you just put an unfinished thing out there? I know. So I'm going to pose a different question first. What is the best way to cross our seemingly infinite lake to get to that mountain on the other side that's just like vaguely in the distance? One stroke at a time. Software is the same way, though the list of things is infinite. The stuff making up that list is not. Those are finite tasks that you can break down into clear, testable outcomes. Now, if a task does not have both of those things, break it down further, on and on and on. Keep going until you can have a piece where you're like, all right, if I implement this, I can test it, I can see a result, and it is complete and done and checked off. Complexity is the death of speed. By breaking down these complex tasks into simple tasks, you can make forward progress, which is always the goal in software, right? We want to keep moving forward. Now, you're going to hear various different frameworks for this like basic concept, extreme programming, agile, all of the works. And they're right. But that core of them all, and they have their different principles for getting the right task done. But the core of it all is break it down, keep it small, right? What this looks like in practice at my company, the project I'm on right now, we work in 2-week sprints, give or take. We have something that can be built and pushed to production every 2 weeks. Mostly tested. It's kind of a small team and we don't have a lot of users, so sometimes we're kind of testing on the fly, and that's okay. Small companies. But we always have something. Even if a feature or a concept is spanning days, weeks, maybe even months, that big thing can always be broken down into chunks, and those chunks can always be released on a consistent basis out into the world, whether they're complete or not, because we have all our infrastructures in place to keep them either hidden from users, exposed to certain people, and that's getting more into the technical weeds of it. But the ultimate point is we have these quick iteration cycles, and so regardless of what we're up to, we can at least always deploy something. Now, not only does this kind of give, the illusion maybe of forward progress, but you are moving forward, but in general, I've found it also just keeps team morale up, right? People don't like when things are hanging. Nobody likes those to-dos that are like hovering over your head, right? Especially like think of your schoolwork, right? Like it sucks to know those finals are there, even if it's 10 weeks away, right? You just feel it. So instead, what really helps is you just have these quick tasks. They don't linger long, and then you just get to cross them off, get that dopamine boost, move on with your day, right? So after finishing our swim, just one stroke at a time, we notice another tool we can add to our kit, the deployment rope. So by following these steps and iterating on them, again, extreme programming, agile, many books you've probably read in your stuff, in your classes, are going to have some type of this. Maybe there's more steps, maybe there's less. But the ultimate point is, if you can't complete this loop with your current task, you got to make the task smaller. You should always be able to finish this loop with whatever you're working on right now. And if you can't, break it down, rinse and repeat. But despite our best efforts to write beautiful, clean code in these perfect loops, the unfortunate reality is that mistakes will be made, right? As we are all well aware, we are human, and humans are fallible, and therefore so is our software. So I actually don't have any magical remedies for that. That's just kind of the way of life. But since we've been on this journey for so long, excuse me, I figured we could take a quick break, quick rest, and I'll tell you a couple software mistake lore. So in my company, we have 2 very famous stories. Not while I was there, but at places the partners who created Uptech Studio worked at before. One of them is an actual jar that we have in the Orange County office down in California. That is a cookie jar, but spelled cookies, C-O-O-K-I-S-E instead of cookies. It's the Cook Eyes jar. And this is because way back when on some project, they were spinning up new infrastructure and they just, for the life of them, could not get the services to talk to each other. They're combing everything, logs, documentation, commits, what went wrong, why doesn't it work? Turns out someone had spelled cookies wrong in the header, and so the API request just couldn't go back and forth. So the entire thing was just because the S, was misplaced. So we have the Cook Eyes jar. Another famous one, this one was at Acorns, if you guys are familiar with like that investment app. The partners at UpTech, or part of them, worked there beforehand. And one of the famous stories from that instance was they were on a development team and they were writing some air handling, and they had this air case that could never be reached, right? I'm sure you could see where this is going. But they had this air case that could never be reached, and developers with a sense of humor, they're like, let's just say this is the teapot air, right? And it'll be our little joke, no one will ever see it. Well, sure enough, weeks later, whole thing's deployed, and suddenly, like thousands of users are getting this notification that says nothing but teapot air across all their platforms. So it turns out the unreachable air could very well be reached, and it was being broadcast to people all over the place. They were able to fix it and put better air handling in. But these are just a couple fun examples of, big time mistakes that can be made. A personal one I just did literally a week ago. We've been implementing a new system. The project I'm on works with a lot of events, right? So we're putting in this event pipeline that will batch events and process them. And then kind of tangential to that, we were making another service that can replay events in case something goes down, a database fails, a cluster fails, it happens. So as I'm testing this service, I keep noticing that we're getting like 2/3 of the events, but like there's always some events missing. So another developer and I for weeks are combing through everything, like every breakpoint, like taking it apart, is it here? Counting numbers, making all these notes, all these tabs. And then it turns out that our batching system, which we had assumed was working, was actually only batching one event at a time because it had a return in the loop where there should not have been a return. So the little one single word was like weeks of combing through, weeks of man hours, because it was just batching one event at a time instead of multiple. So it happens. Mistakes happen. It's okay. So that being said, after our nice rest, some good campfire stories. The next morning, we find nestled among the coals a traveling companion that seems to have a particularly keen ear. So as we've all heard, mistakes are often the best place for growth, even if it's awkward and uncomfortable in the moment. But when you make mistakes, instead of fretting about them, I want to leave you with a list of questions you can ask yourself or your duck partner. First one is, what caused the error in the first place? Now, the key to this one is to iterate on that question until you come to a real solution. Not like, oh, Nikita pushed up this commit, it's her fault. Then I'll be like, well, my other developer pushed up this, other commit, it was his fault, I was just building, right? Instead, keep breaking that down until it's like, oh, well, this configuration actually was like super editable, it had the wrong permissions, we should probably adjust the permissions, right? Once you get to the point where you're blaming the infrastructure and the code base, that's the point where you're like, here's an actionable fix. So that's a really important one. Relatedly, once you make a mistake, what guardrails can you put up to prevent it from happening again, right? Are there other things you can put up to prevent it? Similarly, because we're big on tests here, are there tests you can put in place to prevent this from happening in the future, to catch it when the code changes, because we know the code will change? And then finally, one that's kind of overlooked, but I found super helpful in my day-to-day, is once you get it all fixed, should there be better documentation explaining what happened in the future, right? Now, this is like on a case-by-case basis, right? If this is like a code bug, probably not. But something that happens, unfortunately, relatively frequently is, we're in infrastructure, there's a lot of things that can go wrong. Maybe a cluster fails, maybe a pod goes down. It might not even be our fault, but there are usually actionable steps to fix it. But if those actionable steps aren't documented somewhere, it's often hard to remember what the heck you did, few months ago, or it's just in the mind of one developer who with that particular skill set. So something we've started doing on my own team is when we run into something weird, like a cluster failed. All right, what steps did we take? What does the error look like? How do we fix it? And that's been super helpful because, it happens maybe once a quarter, and by the time it happens, you totally have forgotten what you did the first time. So things like that are surprisingly super important. So all that being said, we have finally made it to mount deployment, the final hurdle before finding our treasure. So putting software out into the world can be a very intimidating act. Not only do you have to maintain your code bases, you got to maintain this infrastructure that could fail at any moment. You got to make sure your software is up and available when it needs to be, especially if you want to scale, right? I mean, how often in your day-to-day life if something goes down and you're just like, well, not using that ever again. Unfortunately, your users are those people, often with a lot of opinion and not a lot of patience. So you got to be able to interact with those people too, which is a little scary but fun. Luckily, we've collected some amazing treasures on our journey to help us scale and get our software out there. Though not comprehensive by any means, these basic ideas will help you get through some thorny software problems. We know the software will always change, and by us remaining flexible, we can keep the software flexible and fit the shifting needs through the technique we learned for good design and by keeping those quick, digestible cycles. When we get stuck, we can lean on our teams and the greater tech community at large, knowing that they have all made mistakes and have, in fact, lived to tell the tale. With these ideas in mind, we can tame the scary beast of complexity into something a little nicer, calmer, more manageable code-based. There's our one code line. It's okay. This doesn't mean the software is always going to remain tame, right? It's still a dragon. But now you at least have some tools and maybe just a little bit of magic to handle those scarier bits of software development. And now, with our newfound experience and amazing dragon taming abilities, we have found our treasure of value-based software. So by asking the right questions around important features, around design, by implementing that good design and abstractions and keeping a constant, what's the word I'm looking for? Like a determination to keep that code base clean, not get lazy with it. By keeping your tasks small, and by humbly working through your mistakes, you will be able to deliver software that provides value to your users and your clients, if you have clients. Because after all, that is the main point, right? If your software doesn't solve a need or fix a problem or bring joy, if it doesn't provide that value, then why are we even building it? Who's even going to want to use it, right? Though a long and demanding journey, it is a very rewarding one if you are willing to start the trek and stay the course. And that's all I have for you. Thank you all for listening. And then, yeah, question away about anything in here. If you just have questions about my job, you can get technical if you want. I might not know, but we can workshop it together. Go for it. Yeah, shoot.
Oftentimes, especially on front-end development, there's a lot of libraries that come out super quickly. They try to solve one problem very well. Mm-hmm. But most companies, and do you see this in your work, they tend to go for like older, stabler things like, like PHP, for example. I've been using that recently, and it's very old, and it seems to be coming back, even though a lot of things have already come out to kind of replace it. Is that where like the industry is stuck in? Like they're just big monoliths that can't really crawl?
Yeah. No, it's a good question. I think it just really depends on the company and like what you're looking for, right? So for instance, we do a lot of Flutter development. That's like a newer language, right? It's put out by Google, really gained popularity only in the last like 3 to 4 years. But the downside of that is it's always changing. There are bugs, and then when they do make big changes, they're often breaking changes, right? So it takes a lot of work to maintain that code base, keep it up to date, because they're pushing out stuff like all the time. I mean, we have to update our Flutter like almost every other week. It's crazy. So there are definitely, I would say in general, there's no like easy answer to that question, right? It is highly dependent on, can you find someone who even knows PHP, for instance, since it isn't very popular? Or if you are using like a newer framework, does it at least have support, or is it actively maintained? Like if you do run into an issue or you post a bug, like is somebody gonna get to it eventually? Is it like a mission critical bug, or is it just kind of like mildly annoying and we can like find a workaround? There's a lot of different questions you can ask to solve that. In terms of like front-end development, because Flutter is front-end development, I've been doing that a lot the last year. We often find like little packages like that'll be like, oh, like this could make it easier, this, could do whatever. The problem is, oftentimes it's like one developer working on it and then they get bored. And so maybe it falls out of date, maybe it's not compatible anymore. Those are definitely risks. But like we like to say, especially because we're often like using those third-party tools, like how quickly can we get something spun up? It's like if you find a good enough tool that requires little effort, it's always the trade-off between, the initial effort and then like a custom job, right? Like most things that you find from like third parties will always get you like 93% of the way there. And so it's like, how willing are you to deal with the 7%, right? Is it in a tolerable range for you or your client? Or is it annoying? A real example that we're working with right now is we implemented Stripe into our app, and we used their like low-code payment portal, because we were like, we don't have the man hours to just completely build a custom credit card safe payment portal. And Stripe has one straight out of the box, right? The problem with that is part of their whole system is it sends out emails because we're a subscription service, and one of our tiers is $0, and so month to month, people are getting like, your invoice is due, but it's for $0. And we've had multiple people be like, hey, this is a little weird, but we've decided that for now, it is okay to have that little quirk in order to have everything else that comes with it, right? So I would just challenge you to ask those types of questions like, yeah, this is a tried and true thing, but is that for a good reason? Or again, is it just because it's been around forever, right? That could be a good thing. Maybe it's just old, right? I mean, Fortran's also been around forever, but we don't really develop in Fortran anymore. Some stuff is still, but not most of it, right? On the alternative, right? Grabbing something too fast before it's too developed, if it's too new, could also be your downfall, because if they're a startup that goes under and you're depending on them, do you have the time to go and rip it all out and find a replacement or build your own replacement? So hopefully that kind of answers your question. There's definitely like many different complexities you can consider, but our kind of general take is everyone kind of has like their little niche they like watching, and people will post updates on like things we're paying attention to. Like one of our favorite things right now is WASM. It's like this, I don't even fully understand it, but basically it's like faster boot up times for programs on a server. And so it's still in its infancy. We haven't implemented anything involving it yet, but we're like watching it, and when it gets to a mature enough place, we're ready to like test it out and see on like a small project maybe, right? So that's another way to go of kind of like take everything with a healthy dose of skepticism, but that doesn't mean don't try it, right? So, yep. Yeah, shoot.
What does your company do?
We do a lot of things. Our main thing is we basically we do a lot of front-end development, like building stuff for people who maybe don't have the technical expertise or need like a dev team to step in. A couple projects we have right now, the one I'm working on internally, which I guess is not for an extra client, but is for us, is a business analytic app. So basically think of like, if you had Apple Health, but for your product. So mostly in software. So we track like, how many users are created, other stuff people might be interested in. Another project we have right now, if you look up Fan Inc., it's like a payment portal app for athletes, so that like match them with donors. So with all the new like name likeness stuff that got updated, so that athletes can like get money and for their sports and participation. They can like set up accounts on this app, and people can like donate to them. So we built that. We do a lot of fintechy things specifically, just because our founders did come from Acorns, and fintech is like has just that additional layer of like, if you're handling people's money, it's got to be super secure. So there's a whole bunch of stuff around that. More recently, we've been getting into more like smaller projects, kind of like one person or maybe two co-founders who are like, hey, we just want to like get this idea off the ground. Can we just spin up something like super easy to like show investors, right? Like, can I bring this to like my pitch deck and be like, this is the working thing? You know, it's not like an app you can necessarily go download on the App Store, but it is something they could hold and use versus just like, you know, wireframes or something. So hopefully that answers part of your question. But we kind of just tackle it all. It's like a tiny dev shop. You know, the founders really like new challenges, so it's just kind of like whatever comes our way, especially in the environment right now with startups losing a lot of money. So, you know, it's been hard to find like big people willing to pay a lot of money. So we've been pivoting more towards like, you know, smaller people, shorter jobs, that type of thing.
So you guys do like kind of more like contract work in a sense? Like
yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. Or like another example, like I'm currently on another project that's been contracted out by a company to like help implement analytics into other people's stuff. So like they are also a contractor who has their own clients, and then they just pull us in because they don't have the technical expertise. They kind of do more like the marketing side. But when a client is like, hey, we want marketing and can you put whatever, our event SDK into our app, then they call on us. And then they're like, hey, you guys like go do this. So yeah, there's like a ton of different things we do. Yep. Anyone else? Yes, Joe.
Are you, or in the past few years, have you seen a shift from maybe doing custom solutions to no or low code solutions?
Yeah, we've done a ton of like low code, no code solutions recently. We actually have had an initiative where a couple people were like diving into that whole world, and then right now we have like 2 clients, I think, where we're doing like Flutter Flow stuff. I don't know if anyone's heard of Flutter Flow, but basically it's just low code, no code Flutter, like kind of like, you know, Scratch blocks, but Flutter. And so we've been like doing that, and that is a way to both help people, then bring like how much we cost down because it's not as many development hours, right? Like there's a lot of stuff you can get out of the box while still being able to have like a mostly working product. Kind of similar to your question, it's like it's only so far you can take it, right, before it needs to be like a fully implemented, you know, custom solution. But like up until that point, it's good enough to usually get people like out the door, again, in front of investors to see, hey, like, is this a viable product? Even just to test, like, is anyone interested in it? Like, could it be viable out in the market? That type of thing. So we've definitely been kind of like pivoting that way a little bit. I mean, we still have like all our custom solutions if that's what people want. But especially with, you know, AI, we've been seeing more people come in maybe with even like a half-baked solution, and then they're like, how do we make it like actually work now, right? So, you know, it's definitely a new thing that's coming up, especially with like all the like pretty decent low-code solutions and people just getting more into the tech sphere of like, you know, maybe they don't have a technical background, but they're like a designer and they can like kind of get something there. So we've been helping like people like that a lot. Yeah. Yes, Kim.
What do you think was like your biggest surprise in the first 6 months of your job after you graduated? You know, moving from sort of like you work on a program and you work on a project for like a couple weeks at most.
Yeah.
Like from capstone. So like, what was your biggest surprise?
That's a good question. I would say probably one of the biggest ones, and this is probably just more specific to consulting, but I mean, it's like dealing with like real clients, right? Which are just people too, and not necessarily technical people. And so it's definitely a skill set to learn how to like translate what you need to do into words they understand, and like, you know, apply appropriate timelines to it and apply the right, you know, like how long should it take you to do this type of thing? And if it doesn't, like, where do those hours come from? Like, how do you, because they're paying you, right? Like, I mean, not directly, but this client is paying the company to build a thing, and if the thing's not getting done, then, you know, some side of the equation could be wrong, right? So that was definitely a more interesting thing, especially not in the 6 months anymore, because the first 6 months I wasn't, like, communicating directly, but now that I've been there for a little bit and I've been, like, lead on the project I'm on now, and I'm kind of like come into the lead role on our internal project. It's definitely interesting, like talking with clients and being like, hey, like, so this is, you know, the things we need to get done. Also just like how slow stuff goes sometimes, like even in software, like it'll just take like a week for anyone to get back to you for like a super simple thing, and you're like, like, does someone just have like 10 minutes, like just to like, push this back so I can get unblocked? But sometimes that's just the way it is, and those are other things, you can bring up, like, hey, like we could have worked on this, but this got stuck. And so I'd say like the biggest thing is definitely like managing client expectations. That was like surprisingly interesting, especially since I kind of grew up in like the startup world. I was like, oh, I got it. I know how startups work. And it's a different story when you're like actually working for them, and you're supposed to be giving a thing and it's not done, or it's not complete, or it's got a bug that we didn't anticipate, and all the other things that can happen. Yeah.
Your response kind of flows into my question a little bit, which is like, how did you develop your pretty incredible communication skills, right? Because like you hear it kind of a lot, like you can be like the best programmer in the world, but if you can't communicate your ideas to others and you can't collaborate with others, it kind of doesn't, like that, it becomes less valuable, right? Mm-hmm. So like, how did you kind of build up your ability to public speak, communicate, collaborate, things like that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I will start that I probably have a slightly natural propensity towards this, just because, I was always that kid in class where they're like, when you're like younger, they're like, who wants to read out loud? And I was like, I do. So I will say that, part of it is definitely personality. However, you can develop any of these skills if you're willing to work at it a little bit. And I would say like quite literally doing stuff like this, right? Like giving presentations, putting yourself into positions such as the Hacker Refactor leadership, where you have to interact with people. And it doesn't literally have to be like standing in front of like hundreds of people and giving presentations, right? Like if that's not your thing, that's totally fine. Most communication happens between like small groups of people, right? So if you are a leader and people are like looking up to you, and you're supposed to be organizing these things effectively, like that's a big thing, right? Like when we first, for instance, full circle, started Bite Sessions, I was like, I don't know how we're going to communicate this to people. How are people going to understand it? Like, is it going to be valuable? Like the whole idea started just because people were like, I just want something else besides just like the code and like the heaviness of school, right? And so I'm just literally in the shower like, how do we give that to people? And thus like the Bite Session was born, right? But how did we communicate that effectively? Took a lot of tries, right? Like the first one we had was good, but then it was trying to be a continuous thing. So it was like, how do you get people to like show up consistently? How do you get people to whatever? Like all of those types of things as well, I think are like secret communication ones that people don't think about, right? They're like, how do you talk to people better? And it's like, well, just talk to them. Well, it's like there are other ways, right? Especially in an incredibly digital world where I work remote most of the time. Like my communication isn't always face-to-face. So how do you effectively communicate through a Slack message, through an email, through a commit message, through a pull request, right? Like these things show themselves a lot of ways. So having the discipline to kind of work through all of those, right? Like, Kim does an excellent job of our event things. They're consistent, they're fun, they're emojied, right? But that was practice, right? It took a while to get there, but by having the discipline to iterate on that and to get there is huge, right?
I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt.
No, go for it.
I heard from Missy today, also Hacker alumni.
Yes.
She's like, just so you know, the emoji that you used in your events this week is apparently what the young folks are using to get high. And I was like, oh,
I didn't know. See, sometimes it breaks out, but that's okay. Or it's even funnier, right? Yeah.
The cloud.
Maybe that's, the shy one, yeah. No wonder everyone's here. But yes, to answer your question, kind of like to tie that up, I think it's just, in any of your little communications, right? Like think about what's a slightly better way I can phrase this, or, meet up with people, like purposely reach out, go to a coffee, go out to the bar, right? Whatever it is. And I think that's like, it's not like some like hardcore rigorous path where you gotta like go do like 10 speaking engagements a year and like suddenly you're a good communicator, right? It's like communicating with people, being able to admit when you're wrong, sorry, I don't know what I did, how can we make this better? All those types of things like just add up over time, I think. So hopefully that answers your question.
It was a great answer.
Awesome, thank you. Sweet. Anyone else? Got more things?
This isn't a question, but
Yeah.
thanks for sharing all that stuff.
Yeah, of course.
From my experience, that you're right on with all that advice. It's all just excellent advice.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. Well, I can't claim it all. I mean, a lot of it was definitely taught here by Jill and Young when he was head of department. So, and you know, lovely people like Sandy Mentz, Kent Beck, all those things. So that's another one. Like, you know, you'll iterate on your own ideas, but find those ideas out there. Follow newsletters. You know, I'm like on like 1 million newsletters now. I don't read them all every week, but they got nice little nuggets. So, yeah, cool.
Well,
Thank
so
you.
much.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and I'm on Discord as Nikita R or Nikita if you just read it as one. So feel free to reach out to me. I'm around. I'm usually responsive. So yeah, don't be shy.